I'd like to start off with another story. This is a story of two boys, and they're identical twins. And the parents, they like having twins, but then they don't like having twins because these twins are total opposites. One is an extreme optimist. The other is an extreme pessimist. And because of the highs of their excitement and the lows of the depressed one, there's a lot of conflict. And the parents just wanting a little bit of peace. They're trying to come up with an idea, make them a little more even keel. So they come up with this idea. What they did was they filled the pessimistic child's room with all kinds of toys, the latest gadgets. They gave him Xbox games, they gave him comic books, minted comic books, they gave him a hoverboard, and Star Wars action figures. And they put him in his room and they left him there for a couple of hours. After a few hours, they returned to his room and they were surprised to see him sitting in the corner with a scowled look on his face, arms crossed, huffing and puffing. And the parents were like, "What's the matter? Why didn't you play with all the toys?" He says, "Well, if I open up the comic book, it's going to lose value. If I play the video game and beat it, then what am I going to do? If I ride the hoverboard and fall on my head, then what?" Parents were like, "Oh, that didn't work." So they went to go check on the other son, and what they did in his room was totally unorthodox. What they did was they filled his room with 6 feet of horse manure. So of course when they opened the door, they were hit with this god-awful smell, but no son to be found. They called his name, they looked in the closet, nothing. They were starting to worry. And as they were leaving, all of a sudden this child jumps out of the pile of poo and says, "Ta-da!" Parents are like, "What are you doing? Playing in the poo?" Says, "Well, if there's this much manure, there's got to be a pony somewhere." I love stories. Stories have the ability to make us laugh, and stories have the ability to give us hope. And one of my favorite stories of hope is the prodigal son. And for this part of the talk, I want to have my son come and join me. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring a fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Thank you, Junior. As you can see, I didn't come alone. I have my son here, Junior. I have my wife, she's got the camera right over there. And my daughter, she's in the back selling the books. Just so proud to be able to come and share this opportunity. So, thank you, son. Great job. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. That song, that Bible verse gives me hope. Hal Lindsey once said, "Man can go 40 days without food, 3 days without water, 8 minutes without air, but only 1 second without hope." My question for you is, have you found yourself lost, broken, afraid? Where do you find your hope? One of the places that I find my deepest hope is that God leaves breadcrumbs. God leaves us clues, because we don't just get lost one time. We find ourselves lost on numerous occasions, but He leaves us clues on how to come back home to Him. And one of the most visible breadcrumb in my life is the Our Father. To that, I have a story. Once upon a time, Forrest Gump, he died and went to heaven. And he's standing at the pearly gates, and he meets Peter. And Peter said, "Welcome, Forrest. We've been watching you. You've lived a pretty interesting life." Forrest says, "Life's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." And St. Peter says, "Now, Forrest, based on the way you lived your life, we would like to just let you in. But there is a test." Forrest's like, "A test? I didn't know there was going to be a test." St. Peter says, "Don't worry. 3 questions. You pass the test, we'll let you in." Forrest says, "Okay, what's the test?" He says, "Okay, question number 1. What 2 days start with T?" Forrest is thinking. St. Peter's waiting patiently. He says, "Forrest, do you have an answer?" He goes, "Yeah, I got it. It's today and tomorrow." St. Peter says, "Well, that's not exactly what we were looking for, but I think we'll let that slide." Here's a second question. How many seconds are there in a year? Forrest is counting his fingers. He's counting his toes. St. Peter is getting impatient. Forrest, there's a line. You have an answer. He says, yeah, I got it, St. Peter. 12. St. Peter's like, where do you come up with 12? So as well, the 2nd of January, the 2nd of February. And again, St. Peter was like, wasn't expecting that one, but I think we'll let that slide. All right, Forrest, here's the last one. It's the most difficult one, but if you get it right, we'll let you in. Forrest says, okay, I'm ready. St. Peter says, what is God's first name? And Forrest says, well, St. Peter, that's the easiest one of all. It's Howard. St. Peter's like, now I know how you got the other two, but how do you come up with Howard? He says, well, it's in my daily prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. From that one prayer, I find 4 distinct ways of knowing God. The first thing I know is know your role. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You see, I have a little girl. She's not little anymore, but she's about here to me now. Maybe more like here. But when she was a lot younger, she was my strong-willed child. She's still my strong-willed child, but even more so when she was little. Every time I would ask her to do something, she would fight me. She didn't want to do what Daddy said. And I tried, the timeouts. That didn't work. Tried spanking. That didn't work. I tried yelling. That didn't work. And one day I just threw my hands in the air and said, God, I don't know what to do with this child. And I went on my knees and I prayed, Lord, help me. And then God birthed in this idea to me. And I gave it a try. So the next time my daughter and I were butting heads, I got down on my knee and I looked at her in the eye and asked her, who are you? And she said, I'm Jenny. And then I asked, who am I? She says, you're Daddy. Then I asked, who's supposed to listen to Daddy? She said, Jenny. And then I told her what needed to be done, and she did it without a fight. And I'm like, amazing. It wasn't until she understood her role in our relationship did anything ever get done. And I believe God does the same thing with me. You see, sometimes I want to control everything. When finances aren't where it needs to be, I start trying to knock on all these doors, trying to get a new client. I tell my wife, honey, do we have to buy all that grocery? Can you just buy what we need? And then when I really start stressing out, I go to the liquor store and buy a Powerball ticket, hoping that's going to solve all my problems. And when my numbers don't hit, and I realize the mess I'm in, I fall down to my knees and pray, Lord, please help me. And then God, who's all-powerful, all-knowing, comes down to my level in the person of Jesus Christ, and he looks at me in my eye and says, who do you say that I am? They say, "You're the Christ. You were the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords." He says, "Who are you?" He says, "I am nothing without you." And when I realize where I belong, where I stand in the relationship, I can fully pray and say, "God, I need you. I need your help." And all of a sudden, God starts opening up doors. Sometimes a client will call up and says, "Hey, I heard you're a bookkeeper. I need a bookkeeper. Can you do my books?" Or my wife might get a promotion, or they might get some money. Maybe a friend called me out of the blue and says, "Hey, I can help you out." But sometimes God just says, "Wait." But as long as I know someone has it under control, life gets a little simpler. Never easier, but simpler. Point number 1 is know your role. Point number 2 is eat, and eat often. Give us this day our daily bread. You notice it wasn't give us this bread weekly, give us this day our weekly bread or our monthly bill, our daily bread. In my daily journeys, working, being at home, I encounter many of the female species. My wife, secretaries, office managers, and every time I encounter them, I notice a familiar trend. They get a lot of headaches. And every time I would ask them if why they have a headache, or I would always ask them this question: "Have you eaten yet?" And 9 times out of 10, they didn't. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I think there's a strong correlation of not eating and headaches. Had they just eaten before they got a headache, life would be a lot easier for them and for us husbands, right? Now, I don't forget to eat. If I don't eat, it's never because I forgot. It's usually on purpose. But when I do not eat for a long period of time, I do find myself reaching for not the healthiest of foods. I eat pretty clean, but if I hadn't eaten, I tend to gravitate to the most convenient food possible. That's usually hamburgers and fries. And then when I eat that, I don't feel as good afterwards. I feel good when I was consuming it, but afterwards I feel kind of like bloated and like, but it was good at the time. And I think sometimes that happens in my spiritual life as well. If I'm not constantly eating of spiritual foods, like reading my Bible, praying, going to church, going to adoration, receiving the Eucharist, if I'm not eating spiritual foods, I find myself getting a spiritual headache. You see, for over 20 years, a little over 20 years of my life, I had an addiction to pornography. It was an addiction that began when I was 8 years old, and at that point in time, I thought I had a talent for finding it. I'd be standing at a magazine rack, and I could find it. Not the one top shelf that a short Filipino couldn't reach, but the ones that were flipped. You can see like the liquor ad or the Marlboro ad, or you can see one slipped because someone else was looking at it before, and I can always find it. And as I grew older and the material became more available, so did the addiction, to the point where I had thousands of movies downloaded on my computer. I had a case full of VHS magazines, and I would consume it daily, just searching for the ultimate image. But every time I consumed it, it felt good at the moment, but after a while, I just felt yucky that I did it. And then on August 14 of 2007, when I gave my life to Christ, that was the thing he pulled out of me, and that addiction was broken. It wasn't broken, just took it away. It had work. I had to put time into it. I had to put filters on my computers. I had to go to reconciliation. I had to constantly check myself. I had filters put on all my computers and have accountability partners. People that can say, hey, how are you doing? One of my most treasured accountability partner is my wife. See, she understands my pain. She understands that struggle. In the very beginning, she didn't, but eventually she realized. And she's been there to support me, to ask me the hard questions, and to give me grace to begin again. When I'm away from spiritual foods, like reading my Bible, going to church, I find myself like the dog returning to his vomit. I go back to that place. So in order for me to not get that spiritual headache, I constantly put myself before God. I listen to over 10 hours of Bible sermons every single day. I'm on YouTube. I'll have things playing in the background. I'll be listening to Bible songs while I'm driving my car. When I go to sleep, I always put in a pod in my, the earbuds, and I press play, and I'll listen to Bible sermons over and over again. Because the more and more I eat of God and His spiritual foods, the less likely I'm hungry for those other activities that once I thought I needed. So, to avoid the headaches, constantly eat spiritual foods. Eat of the daily bread of God. Point number 3, forgive, and forgive quickly. You met my son, Junior, and when he was much younger, he was playing with some friends, and at one point in time, he got hurt. He rushed to me and was crying. I was consoling him. When he finally calmed down, I said, "Son, hey, why don't you go forgive your friend now?" And he looked at me like, "Dad, what do you mean go forgive my friend? They hurt me. They need to come to me and ask me for forgiveness." And I told my son, I said, "Hey, son, be quick to forgive, because the sooner you forgive, the quicker you can play again." Now, do you think he bought that? No, he didn't. I mean, if we as adults have a hard time forgiving, how much more for a child? Why is it important for forgiveness? God says, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." God's saying in order for us to be forgiven, we need to forgive. Let me give you an example of that. Imagine it's your birthday and you want an Apple Watch. That's all you want. You ask for it, you tell your family about it, and you constantly plant seeds that you want it. And comes your birthday, what do you get? Socks, a tie, no Apple Watch. You feel a little jaded. I told them what I wanted. They gave me socks and a tie. Here's my Apple Watch. And you hold this resentment, you hold this anger, and all of a sudden, someone comes along and has the ultimate gift for you, and they offer it to you, but you can't receive it because your hands are holding on to the anger to the bitterness. Even if they were to give it to you and they try to put it in your hands, you move a little bit like this, you just lost that gift. In order to receive the gift, you have to open your hands. You have to release the anger and the bitterness that you're holding in order to receive the gift. God has grace, but in order to receive grace, you have to give grace. When I was 18 years old, I worked for this nutrition store, and I was one of the main employees. I worked my tail off, and one day my boss comes in and accuses me of stealing from him. And I thought, why would I steal from you? I'm your hardest worker. Actually, I'm your only worker, but I work hard here. And basically what happened was he gave me as a gift a vitamin pack. It was like a $50 pack of vitamins. And I accepted it. And one of the reasons he gave it to me was I was selling so much product. Also, the box was damaged. I accepted it. 2 months later, he asks me, "Do you want to come clean?" I said, "What do you mean come clean?" He said, "You stole from me." I said, "No, I didn't." He says, "Yeah, you know that vitamin pack that was damaged?" I said, "Yeah, I remember you gave it to me." He says, "Well, it's on the shelf." He says, "No, I have it at home." He says, "Well, why don't you go home, go get it, and show me?" So of course I go home, and I'm mad. I'm seething as I'm driving. How dare he accuse me of stealing from him? And I get it, come back, and show it to him. "Look, it's damaged." He says, "Well, you just damaged it on purpose." And I just threw up my hands and said, "I quit." Gave him the key. He had a check written out for me already. I don't know what happened, why he wanted to accuse me of stealing, but he did. And for the longest time, I had so much anger. I thought of different ways that I could make his life miserable. Thought about throwing bologna on his car on a hot day, leave a little circle. Thought about spraying like honey around his store so cockroaches would come at it. If I ever saw him at a bar, I thought I would just cold cock him. So much anger of what he did, and after a while, I'm like going, why am I letting this guy continue to hurt me? I mean, he probably doesn't even know the pain I'm feeling. If anything, he probably doesn't even care. But I was giving him this power over me. And so I decided, I just gotta let it go. And sure enough, by letting it go, all of a sudden it started opening up doors for me to find different job opportunities. It allowed me to go into working for myself, becoming an entrepreneur. I no longer wanted to have somebody have that ability over my life to just take from me what I worked so hard for. Had I stayed at that job and was just an employee, that's probably all I would have been. But by seeing what would happen by releasing the pain, all of a sudden I realized all the other gifts I got by letting go. When you realize that forgiveness is more for you than the other party, forgiveness can be a lot more simpler. Never easier, but simpler. Forgive. Forgive those who hurt you, so God can forgive you for what you've done. Forgive us our trespasses, so we can forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. The fourth point that I've learned is you have to prepare for a fight. There was this one time I was going on a retreat, and before the retreat, My wife said, "Hey, would you mind helping me in the garage? Can we move this shelf?" And I was thinking, sure, I'll help you in the garage, but I don't want to move the shelf, because I knew her intention. She wanted to donate the shelf. And I'm okay with donating things, but it was a fairly new shelf, and I was using it for my stuff. And so he says, "No, I'm not going to move it." And all of a sudden, she says, "I can't wait till you go on that retreat. I don't want to see you." And I'm thinking to myself, it's just a shelf. But there was so much anger there, and I honestly hope that I could have said I took that like a man. But it made me cry. And I went to my room, and all of a sudden I started dissecting exactly what was happening. I'm like, oh, I'm about to go on a retreat. Devil wants to attack my wife to attack me, so neither of us has a good time. And so I went to my room, and I started praying, and I started rebuking the devil in Jesus' name, and I said, praying that Lord would soften my wife's heart, and that I would have patience for my wife. And I just prayed, and I just prayed. Later on in that day, my wife started poking me. Her way of saying sorry, but not saying sorry. And we were able to reconcile. And everything was all good. Retreat was perfect. The devil has sneaky ways of attacking you. Another way that he attacks our household is on Sunday morning. Whenever we're getting ready, I'm usually the first one ready. I'm getting the kids ready, and my wife's lagging a little bit, and I'm saying, "Honey, you're supposed to be at church. Kids are in choir. I'm ushering today. Could you please hurry?" And I've learned that I have to be patient. You see, I like to be early. I've learned when you're early, you're on time. When you're on time, you're already late. My wife likes to be casually late. And it drives me nuts, and anytime I poke at her to hurry up, all of a sudden we get in a fight, and I'm like going, we're trying to go to church here, and we're getting in a fight. And so I recognize that. And so I've said, 10:15, if we're not all in the car, we're taking 2 cars. And I think that saves our marriage, if anything. It's understanding that the devil, our enemy, does not want us to be with God. He doesn't want us to have a strong relationships in our marriage, so he slowly starts attacking in those different directions. And I've learned of those attacks through experience that I have to be constantly in prayer. Before this retreat, I knew there was going to be some devil's attacks, but I made sure, I knew exactly where he was going to attack me. We had a couple of events prior to. I made sure the dishes were done. I made sure the house was clean. I made sure I loaded the car, I unloaded the car. I looked for all the different ways that drove her nuts, and I made sure to take care of it, because I knew the devil would want to jab at her to get to me. And so far we're pretty good, right? Good. It's important to understand. You got to be prepared for the fight ahead. You see, if you're not involved with God, the devil's not going to bother you, because you're doing exactly what he wants you to do. Nothing. But when you start engulfing your life with God, all of a sudden he starts poking, and when it gets too hard, like, oh, I can't do this. It's too difficult. I remember when I was probably 15, 16 years old, I saw someone in my life, they were devoting their life to God. And I thought, that's exciting to see somebody on fire for God. But the excitement dissipated. And when I asked them, what happened? You were on fire. Why did you pull back? They told me it got hard. I started seeing the devil's attacks, and it was too difficult, so they retreated. And I talk to them on a regular basis, and they go to church, and they know of Jesus, but there's still a little pullback because they're afraid. But we're told in the Bible that they will hate us, they will persecute us, because they hated him, they'll do it to us. Again, basic instruction before leaving earth. When we know it's going to happen, and we know it's going to make us stronger by going through it, it's simpler to understand. Never easy, but simpler. Gotta prepare for a fight. Allow me to recap those 4 points. Know your role. There's only one king, and we're not it. Point number 2, eat, and eat daily of spiritual foods to avoid the spiritual headaches. Forgive, and forgive quickly. It's been said that unforgiveness is like being trapped in a jail for life. And the only one with the key is you, is me. By forgiving, you open the door. Lastly, prepare for a fight. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You see, to close it up, we are physical beings living in a physical world, but surrounding us is a spiritual battle. God is drawing us close to him, while the devil is trying to pull us away from him. The devil will use things like pride, busyness, unforgiveness, and fear to take us off our journey. But God gives us clues. He gives us breadcrumbs. He gives us prayer. He gives us the Bible. He gives us the church. He gives us adoration. He gives us the Eucharist. God gives us breadcrumbs so we can come back home. And when we follow those breadcrumbs, we find our way. And Jesus is the way. He's the way, the truth, and the light. No one comes to the Father but by him. And when we follow those breadcrumbs, we find our way home to the Father, to the Son, to the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you.